is going to work. Takes a minute or two. It takes about 30 seconds or so to work. Yes, you should now all see a little warning sign to say it's recording. So, good evening, everyone. Tonight, I am going to, as I say, give an overview of the collections of Edinburgh City Archives. We have over 900 years worth of recorded history of the city, and it is one of the best municipal archives in a number of areas that I have the privilege of working for and looking after. What I will attempt to do is just go over the kind of big collections and ask, kind of go over them in topics of what you can find out about the city from those collections. Because I think often archives, where people really connect with archives is when they find the stories in the archives, when they find the answer to the questions they want to ask. And so hopefully I will give you some of the ideas of what you can ask from the archives that I look after. First kind of start of the night is, first question of the night is, what is our oldest record? Well, we do have a borough minute book. It's our first continuous minute book from 1551. Believe it or not, the first page actually complains about the street cleaning. It goes to show that very little has actually changed within the council over the last 450 years or so, 460 years. So, but no, we actually have an earlier minute book, or at least an extract of the borough minute book of 1456. Older than that, however, is the King Robert I Confirmation Charter in 1329, confirmed only mere days before he died. In it, it's probably the most famous charter we have in our collection. He confirms the rights and privileges of the Royal Borough of Edinburgh. However, it is actually nearly, well, 150 years earlier than that, in 1140s, that we have the King David I Charter to Holyrood Abbey, which created eventually the Canongate kind of borough as well. It's roughly 1140s, we don't know exactly when, and it is our earliest charter. However, there is a fifth one, which I just like to point out. It's me as a medieval historian, is we know from other charters, because that's the way medieval history research works, that Edinburgh was made a borough in the early years of David I's reign, sometime between 1124 when he came to the throne and 1128. So in theory, somewhere out there, maybe not existing anymore, sadly, there is a charter there granting Edinburgh its royal borough status, but sadly, we do not have it. So there you go. The core of our collection, as any other sort of local authority archive, is the minutes of the borough, of the authority of the city, where it's called by its various names, whether that's the borough, the town council, the city council. And we have, as I've described, minutes from there from 1456 to present day. We're still receiving on a monthly basis signed minutes from the committees and council sessions of the City of Edinburgh Council. But it's taken a long journey to get to the point where we have a single authority over the city, and for hundreds of years we've had different sort of authorities across the city governing different parts. So whether that be the police or sort of planning, housing, water or gas, these were controlled by different authorities over time. And we have minutes for most of them, including the Canongate Borough Court, which covered a large area around the borough for 300 years nearly. We've got the Leith Borough Court as well, from sort of mid-17th century up to 1920, when it famously came into the city through the amalgamation. We celebrated or commemorated the boundary extension with sort of Leith and the various other communities that came in 1920, last year and this year under the Redrawing Edinburgh sort of programme. So if you haven't seen or heard of it, do look it up, Redrawing Edinburgh. There's a lot of sort of online content for that as well, in terms of celebrating the different communities that came in at that time. And we also have Queensferry Borough records as well for South Queensferry. In terms of what Edinburgh's buildings and streets look like, we, compared to other municipal archives, we don't have as strong a photographic collection, sadly. A lot of the photographs are actually held with the Central Library. They look after them very well there, and they put them on their capital collections and our own stories sites, so they're very accessible online. Sadly, ourselves, we don't have as much as I've experienced in other archives of the past. But we do have a world-class planning set of records from the city from the mid-16th century or early 16th century up to, well, it says 1976, but actually there are plans still being created to this day through the building control process. And they will cover buildings large and small, great and minor. And we have some amazing drawings of municipal buildings and civic buildings like Usher Hall, Scotsman Hotel, which are stunning to look at, and they are used from time to time for exhibitions, but they are accessible through our search room. It's not just, however, plans. We have minute books from that time talking about the various different changes that happened to streets and buildings through the city as well from that time period. And what photographs we do have are mainly from the kind of 40s through to the 80s. We do have one set of collection of photographs that shows the boundary between Edinburgh and Leith in 1920, which was quite an interesting one, where they should kind of attempt to show that there is no boundary there. It's quite an interesting kind of snippet of what the city looked like at that time as well. We do have all the survey maps, obviously. You can get probably better collections of the National Library's map collection, but we do have our own set from the 1890s to 1940s. And we do have the 1949 Civic Survey, which is a lovely printed volume of what the city looked like in 1949 and what they were trying to do with the city from that date. There are plans there to put major roads through rather famous parts of Edinburgh, as well as putting concrete walkways on Princes Street. So, which obviously didn't happen as a result of the outcry, but it's a fascinating insight into what the city was like just after the war and what the town council saw as the future of the city, even if its residents didn't necessarily agree. Where did people live? So for here, we're really looking at taxation records. Again, we've got very early extent rolls, or stent rolls as we call them, from the 1580s through to 1847, and also valuation survey books from 1843 onwards. And they will give you an indication of ratepayers, which could be women, and give you an insight in terms of who owned property and who lived in property. The Register of Voters we have from 1832, and again, that will give you an indication of who lived on properties, but only those who could vote. So obviously, that with the franchise changing over that time period, you don't always get everyone that might have lived in that particular address. Other things that we've got are post office directories from 1806 onwards, and they will give you an indication of potential people who lived at residential addresses. But you had to pay to get into the post office directory, so it's often sole traders and professionals that would pay for themselves to be in the post office directories. And finally, one of my favorite ones is the alien register. So as a result of the Napoleonic War, there was a fear or concern around aliens or foreigners in the cities of the United Kingdom. And so there was an act passed by Parliament to say that foreigners had to be registered locally. And so we do have some registers that indicate who the foreigners who lived in the city during that kind of time period. And it gives a fascinating insight on people who wouldn't have necessarily turned up in any other type of way. How did people get about? So for that, we have the Fourth Pilotage Authority in terms of the pilots coming into the city. And I'm just going to see, because I think someone's just been let in, so I will admit. So we have the Fourth Pilotage Authority for the pilots who brought in ships down the Forth. And we also have the Lothian Regional Transport Department records. Now, although it's Lothian Region, that's the kind of core part of it. We do actually have, that stretches back to 1929 when the Transport Department for the corporation was set up. and it has strategies and garage plans and records around how the city's public transport system was run during that time period. And we also have, which surprises some people at least, motor vehicle registrations from the early 1900 to 1958, when it no longer became a local authority responsibility after that period of time. So yeah, we have some records around vehicle registrations. There you go. All of these photographs are from the Lothian Regional Transport Photographic Archive, which is quite interesting. Who was at school? Well, we have the Edinburgh School Board minutes, and they give an insight in terms of how the public education system was first set up in 1873 through to 1919. After 1919, it joined the council as an integral part of the council, so it becomes basically the education committee at that point in time. But they do give an indication of staff who are employed at the schools and the curriculum that was taught at the schools, and it's an interesting insight in terms of how education was developed in the city. More specifically around schools themselves, we have archives for 154 schools within the city, past and present. That covers nurseries, primaries and secondaries. In particular, I know it's the Old Town Association, so we have the Milton House Primary School, or what's now the Royal Mile Primary School, which we have records from 1879 to 1997 for. So it's a very good set of records. For that, in terms of family history, you're really looking at admission registers. But again, the logbooks are quite useful in terms of giving an indication of what happened at schools, because they were the headmaster's kind of logs in terms of what was happening at the school, but also in terms of staff. You can often find lists of staff and mentions of staff in the logbooks. I find the logbooks can vary quite significantly depending on the headmaster. They can be very dry or they can be very detailed. You just have to kind of look to see. I should also say we do have other records relating to schools, so things like concerts and programs and the like. Not every school we have that, but we do have a number of schools that give us sort of activities and material that go beyond simply the core records of the admission registers and logbooks. So next, what happened to the poor and sick within the city? Compared to Glasgow, where I have worked in the past, our poor law records aren't anywhere near as good. My predecessor, Richard Hunter, tells a great story, unfortunate story of how the archives were asked if they would like these old records. 2 weeks, I think, a short while later, they took their time to get back to them saying, yes, we would like them, and they had been basically mulched by that point in time and were destroyed. So we've got some records, but then, as I said, nowhere near extensive as you might be familiar in Glasgow and other local authorities. We have the Canongate and Edinburgh workhouses records, and they give you, in terms of the minutes, they'll tell you potentially sort of patients that came into the workhouse, as well as sort of registers to say when people came in. So they will give you some insight in terms of names, but they won't necessarily give you a huge amount of information about why they were there and how long they were there for. And again, we've got the parochial board minutes as well that give you an indication of names. And also sometimes they'll all have discussions about particular paupers that might have come to the attention of the board. Who kept the law and who broke it? One of my favourite titles of the slides. We've got the Lothian Borders Police Archive as well as the Lothian Fire and Rescue Service Archive. Both of these are quite not unique. I mean, other local authorities have police archives, but they are very early. The police, Edinburgh was one of the first to have a police service within Scotland, and we have records dating back from when it was started in 1805, and that is quite unusual. And in terms of the fire service, it is Braidwood was our first fire master, and he actually founded the fire service here first before he then went down to become the London fire master, where he gained much more fame as a result of that. So yes, we have good records for the fire brigade in terms of it being the first municipal fire service, proper municipal fire service in the country in that regard. And it's not just early material. We've actually got later material in terms of going up to 1992 and 2011. And for the police, certainly we've got very good personnel records as well. So if you have any relatives or family members that were policemen, there's a chance that we may have a record for them. And you can get quite good information about where they served, what sort of merits and demerits they would have potentially in relation to their service record as well. We do also have criminal convictions registers in terms of the rogues of Ulriki, as we charmingly called the exhibition that we did with the National Records of Scotland. And they are really interesting in terms of seeing, some of them are arranged by convict, so you can see all the different crimes that they've committed over time, which is quite interesting as well. We do have army and militia records. So the local militia and volunteer regiments are part of the course in terms of having records of who signed up to the local militia and volunteer regiments. And they give, as you would expect, basically names, their details around their height and fitness to serve, and names and sometimes correspondence as well. However, we've also got army attestation registers, which are, I'm going to say, unique at least to us in Scotland, in so much as we have oaths. Basically, to serve in the army, you had to make an oath of allegiance to the crown, and that needed to be witnessed by a magistrate. And it was seemingly army procedure for most of these to happen in Edinburgh. And so we have these registers from 1794 up to 1887, so nearly 100 years, of soldiers from all over the country being funneled through Edinburgh and swearing their oath of allegiance, and that being recorded by the local magistrates in the Edinburgh Borough Court. So we've got these interesting records which can be very useful if you're trying to track down which, that they might have served in the army, which regiment they were going to go into, etc. So it is quite a useful set of records to look through. Where did people work and shop? We have over 40 business archives within our collections, and they range from accountants to rope makers to tea merchants. Some of the big ones are Bovril, Jenner's, McFarlane Smith, or Duncan Flott, two companies that came together, which was a big pharmaceutical giant to start in the 20th century, and Melrose Tea, which had operations in India and in China. And the Chamber of Commerce for both Edinburgh and Leith. They're very interesting to give an insight in terms of Edinburgh's reach, in terms of its commercial links across the world. Certainly the Melrose Tea ones, they have correspondence from tea agents, local boys from Edinburgh, going out to serve in the kind of deepest, darkest China and in India to keep the kind of tea leaves coming. And they have correspondence in relation to their times out there, so they're quite interesting there. Similarly, Jenner's is very much an icon of the Prince history in Edinburgh, and again we've got some great catalogues and other records relating to the department store. So they're both useful in terms of family history. If people worked for these companies, we've got some records in relation to that, but also in terms of just sort of seeing nostalgia in that sense, and academic research in terms of kind of economy of the city over time, and how it was connected very closely to different outposts of empire throughout the 18th and 19th century and 20th century. I should also say that post office directories are really good at kind of highlighting the smaller enterprises and smaller businesses that existed but we don't have records for. So you can get all sorts of information from post office directories in terms of where businesses operated, how long they were in operation for. They won't give you personnel records or indication of income or anything along those lines, which the actual archives would give you, but they are still useful in terms of confirming that a business existed within the city. We then go on to the city's merchants and tradesmen. So these are one of our big core sets of records. So we're very privileged to have all these records for the different incorporations and merchants company of the city, and of the different parts of the city in terms of Neath and Canongate as well. The list in terms of what is actually in these collections is very long, so I'm not really going to go into huge detail, but we do have these incorporated incorporations and the Merchants Company, and they do have indications of membership in terms of local acts, in terms of how tradesmen and merchants could operate within the city in relation to their particular trade as well. And we do have Burgess records as well from 1487 through to the present day. Burgess tickets are still being issued. Even I think I'm trying to think from last year as well. So they are a core collection, and they do give insight in terms of sort of the professional class or the professional trades class of the city, the merchants of the city. What did people do for leisure and faith within the city? So we have an odd sort of collections here. We have associations and groups records, so that's like allotments for the Bilmar Association, which is a very good set of records. That we've got fraternal societies in terms of gardeners, and scouts associations as well, in terms of scout troops, I should say, records relating to that. Often those will focus on who has got basically who is the member of these different associations and groups, as well as the activities and events that they did. We do have charities. We're very privileged to have the EVOC archive in terms of being able to coordinate sort of the voluntary sector within the city for, well, since 1868. It's a wonderful archive to give an indication of how the city has sort of looked upon its charities in terms of providing support to unfortunates and others deserving of support. And it's actually in the last couple of years been catalogued as well, so it's quite accessible in that regard. We do also have legal trusts, and those trusts have quite a significant say in different parts of the city in terms of land ownership and in terms of how different entities within the city have operated in the past. Again, we have too many to actually individually list, but if you're looking for records of a trust that has some pedigree within the city, do get in touch, and we should be able to help you work out if we've got those records within our collection. We do have some church records. Obviously, the Church of Scotland records are all held by the National Records of Scotland, and sadly, because they are 500 meters away from a stone's throw distance from our search room in the city chambers, they're not going to give us these sets of records anytime soon. And it does mean that we're relatively short on that. But we do have some Episcopal churches in terms of the records of the city, and some Baptist and congregational churches as well. So if your ancestors were involved in those denominations or other denominations that weren't part of the established church, then please do let us know, and we'll let you know. We do have some records for local festivals, and I'm particularly keen on trying to collect more of them, because I feel that there are quite a lot of festivals that happen that aren't just the festival in the city centre. And trying to remember, there's at least one festival that we've got in Portobello, and I'm sure there's another one which my memory escapes me now. But yes, we do collect records of festivals in terms of how they were organised, how sort of the photographs of how they were sort of run and who attended them and the like. So those are there for you to look at. We do have sports clubs in terms of various ones around the city, from bowling clubs, even a flying club, rowing, and also Meadowbank Stadium. So Meadowbank closed, managed to acquire records relating to how it was run from the 70s through to the 90s, as well as different events that were held there. There you go. And we're still getting more. So we do have new accessions in 2021. We're now getting digital accessions as a result of getting a digital archive repository. So we get webcasts of council meetings. We also have the Edinburgh Poverty Commission, which is quite important in terms of how the city views homelessness. And the engagement in that was primarily online, all that online engagement and interaction as part of the digital deposit that we now have within our repository. But also paper-wise, we have the Edinburgh Electrical Society, Hewlett Packard in South Queensferry, and Scotland and Barbados in that regard. So I thought I'd finish then with 3 stories from the archives, because people like to hear stories. And they are The Elephant, The Rules of the Game, and The Fencer. So you may heard of these already, but the Elephant was an interesting one. So we had someone who was going through the Dean of Guild court petitions for the 18th century. And Dean of Guild court petitions they weren't just to do with planning at that point in time. They could be anything to do with basically sort of buildings within the city. And they can be a fascinating insight into all the gripes that neighbours had with each other within the city. And one day, this researcher came along and said, I don't believe I've just found this, but there's someone complaining about an elephant being on the first floor of a tenement building within the city. And sure enough, we did a look at it, and yes, it was a Baxter, Adam Kerr is his name, who protested on the 23rd of November, saying that his ground floor property, where he was baking, was being besmirched by elephant dung and other unfortunate sort of fluids and material coming down into his space and spoiling his business. And he noted that it came down in great quantities. And he was very insistent in his petition that he had to, that members of the Guild Court had to come and see this, to see that this was the case, possibly because he thought maybe they wouldn't believe him. And so what I particularly love about the story and about each of these stories is that there is an element where you can go and check other records to confirm this. And so we went to the town council minutes, separate from the Dean of Guild, to be a little bit earlier in October 1705. And sure enough, the owner of the elephant was a man by Adam Sever, his Sever, I can say his name, and a Dutchman. And he is indeed petitions the council, the town council, on the 31st of October, to show his elephant to the citizens of Edinburgh. And he's granted that after giving a payment to the treasurer for the use of the pool. And so, yes, he did have permission to do it. Whether or not he was sort of told to stop showing the elephant and move on after the petition from Adam on the 23rd of November is lost to history, sadly. But the elephant is known to have gone eventually up to Dundee, where it sadly dies because of the cold in December, and because Adam Server didn't really know how to feed and look after the elephant. And actually, a book was written on it called Elephantia, I think. And the story really ends on a rather gruesome tale where a sort of enterprising surgeon finds out about the fact that this local surgeon in Dundee finds out about the elephant and does a dissection on the elephant and writes a kind of whole paper on what he finds out of the elephant as a result of it. So there you go. That is the elephant. And then in terms of the rules of the game, again, coming across this was a bit of a surprise, but we have the earliest rules of golf within the town council minutes. And it's to do with the fact that the town council was the sponsor of the first competition on leaf links in 1744. Sorry, I had to check that for a second. And the town council had to agree to the rules before it could agree to fund the award as a result of that. So yes, that is something that's come up, and it's been verified. And it goes to show that, yes, the town council will discuss all sorts of different things in its minutes and come across it. It's interesting because the 11 rules vary slightly from the 13 rules that come from the first association of golf, which was basically came off the competition that is held at the National Library of Scotland. But yes, it goes to show that we we have the earliest, and it's interesting for golf and sport historians that is what is there. And then finally, we have the fencer. So this comes from not our town council minutes, or from our Dean of Guild court records, but from the aliens registers that I talked about before. And there's an entry on the 12th of March, 1794, of a Anthony Rogerson, who was a fencing master, and it says quite clearly he's a black man from Virginia, and he is based within Edinburgh and has been for the last 11 years past. And he doesn't intend to leave, thank you very much, and he is in Baker's Close, or Baxter's Close, I should say. And that could be the end of it. That was interesting in itself. But we do find out that, I'm just checking this. We do find from trade directories from that time that he's clearly listed as a teacher of fencing. So he's a fencing master. And he appears in about 1784, which matches up in terms of the 11 years from 1794. And his last entry is recorded within the directories in 1800, 1801. And he carried out his classes in Brodie's Close in Lawnmarket. However, we find him in the 1810 Edinburgh Annual Register as a story which recounts that in that year he was in his home and at night, and ruffians invaded his home over an argument caused by their indecent young girl that had left Rogerson's home that night. Despite being outnumbered 4-1 by these ruffians and surprised whilst eating his dinner, Rogerson managed to apparently stab one of the assailants in the hand with a fork before then being beaten and kicked. He survived, thankfully, and was taken to the public office on Bow Street. Unfortunately, he was confined to the watch house overnight to make sure that the assailant he stabbed survived, which the man did. And that was it. Sadly, we don't know anything other than the fact that he was required to post bail after that point in time. We don't know anything more in terms of that story. But again, it's just interesting to see how the different records kind of all tie up and work together to tell you a bit more of a story in relation to that. And that is, if I get to, I'm pressing the wrong button, there we go. And that is kind of the end of my stories. Here are my team's contact details in terms of our website, our email address and telephone number. We are still picking up telephone messages that we prefer people generally to email. And our collections information is on the Scottish Archives Network, or SCAN as it's called, and the National Archives Discovery site, which as well. SCAN is good for existing collections that we've had for some time because they're described in better detail, but the National Archives Discovery is updated more often in terms of our collections. Our search room is technically open at the moment. We're not allowed to let members of the public into the city chambers, but we've managed to work with Historic Environment Scotland, who's very kindly offered us basically 2 slots on Fridays from 9 AM to 4 PM. And we're sort of welcoming researchers in to look at material on that basis. But we're also, if people can give us specific requests around what they're looking for, sort of taking photographs of material and providing that remotely by email as well. There we go. I think I will stop there. I will hang up the recording.